A millionaire restaurant owner disguises himself as a poor elderly man to evaluate the true service in his own establishment. But what he discovers will change everything. The midday sun cast a golden glow through the restaurant's windows, reflecting off the carefully arranged tables. It was a typical day for Lucy, a young and dedicated waitress, known for her patience and warm smile. Her shift had started hours ago, and dealing with demanding customers didn't bother her. For Lucy, her job was more than just serving food. It was an opportunity to treat people with dignity, something she always believed was fundamental, regardless of appearance or how much they were spending. While she was cleaning a table near the window, something unusual caught her eye. An elderly man, moving slowly and wearing clothes worn by time, paused at the restaurant's entrance. He looked around, visibly uncomfortable, as if he knew he wasn't welcome. His shabby, faded clothes made him stand out in the luxurious setting. Despite his hesitation, he took a deep breath and walked in. The sound of clinking silverware stopped for a brief moment. Some customers glanced up, curious. Roberto, the manager, a man with a stiff posture and a critical gaze, frowned as he noticed the man's presence. He whispered something to one of the nearby waiters, who chuckled quietly. "Did you see who just walked in?" Robert said, a smirk of disdain on his lips. "This isn't a charity house." Lucy, watching from afar, noticed the old man's discomfort and the tension among the staff. Without a second thought, she stepped forward before the manager could take any action. "Good afternoon, sir," Lucy greeted him, her voice soft and welcoming as she approached. "Please take a seat. I'll bring you the menu." The man looked up, surprised, as if he hadn't expected such kindness. He smiled faintly and let her guide him to a table by the window. Lucy pulled out the chair for him and gently helped him settle in. As she walked away to get the menu, the atmosphere in the restaurant seemed to shift. Whispers spread among the waiters, and Robert crossed his arms, visibly irritated. "If this old man can't pay," he muttered to a colleague, "she'll have to cover the bill." Lucy, however, wasn't fazed by the comments or stares. To her, that man deserved the same respect as anyone else. When she returned with the menu, she noticed hesitation in his eyes. "Sir, what would you like to order?" she asked with the same gentle smile, ignoring the glances around. He looked at the menu for a moment. "I'd like this dish here," he said, pointing to one of the most expensive items on the menu. She simply smiled again. "I'll get that order in for you, sir. I'll be around if you need anything else." Lucy walked away to place his order, while the old man, still wary of such kindness, started to relax in his chair, observing the people around him. He had no idea, but this meal would change his life, and Lucy's forever. The atmosphere around her was tense. As she made her way to the kitchen to put in the old man's order, she felt the heavy gazes of her colleagues following her. The restaurant, normally filled with laughter and lively conversation, now felt like a stage for silent judgment. Robert watched her from a distance, a mix of disdain and impatience on his face. He approached a group of employees whispering near the counter, his eyes narrowed, clearly upset with the situation. "Lucy's wasting her time on that guy," one of the waiters commented, hiding a sarcastic smile. "No way he's got enough money to pay for even a coffee." Robert, his face reddening with anger, crossed his arms and sighed loudly. "Of course he doesn't. And if he can't pay, guess who's footing the bill?" He raised an eyebrow, shooting a pointed look at Lucy, who was walking by the dining area again at that moment. Lucy, however, kept her head held high. She knew how easy it was for people to judge based on appearances, but she believed every customer deserved to be treated with respect, no matter their circumstances. Besides, there was something in the old man's eyes that stirred her compassion, a mix of weariness and dignity that, despite everything, hadn't been entirely worn away by time or hardship. When she returned to the table, the old man's hands were trembling slightly as he watched the movement around him, trying to make himself invisible. He avoided eye contact whenever someone looked at him for longer than necessary, clearly uncomfortable. Lucy approached and placed the plate in front of him with a kind smile. "Here's your order, sir. I hope you enjoy it." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but filled with sincerity. Before we start the story, I'd like to know what city you're watching from. Tell me in the comments, and I'll leave a heart for you. The old man looked up and thanked her with a slight nod, without saying a word. He picked up the silverware carefully, as if afraid of breaking some invisible rule in that sophisticated setting. Every movement was measured, and Lucy noticed how hard he was trying not to attract any more attention than he already had. But to her, this customer was just like any other, no matter what others said or thought. While the old man ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a special meal, perhaps the best he'd had in days, Robert couldn't hide his growing frustration. He approached Lucy as soon as she returned to the counter to take other orders. His voice was low but firm, just enough for her to hear. Do you have any idea what you're doing? What do you think will happen when he finishes his meal and can't pay? Lucy stayed calm, even though she could feel the tension in the air. He deserves to be treated with the same respect as any other customer, Robert. Robert huffed, shaking his head in disbelief. Respect? This is a business, not a charity. If he doesn't have the money, the bill's on you. Got it? Lucy swallowed hard but didn't back down. I'll take responsibility if that's the case. But I believe we're here to serve everyone the best way we can. The manager walked away, still irritated, while Lucy tried to stay focused on her work. She knew she was taking a risk, but something about the old man touched her deeply, as if he carried a story that deserved to be heard, even though the world around him insisted on ignoring it. The old man finished his meal in silence, except for the soft sound of silverware on the plate. Lucy kept an eye on him discreetly while attending to other tables. He ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it were the best meal he'd had in a long time. The gratitude in his eyes, even though it wasn't spoken, was clear. When he was done, the silence surrounding him became even more pronounced. It was the moment everyone in the restaurant seemed to have been waiting for. The old man wiped his mouth with the napkin, looked around as if preparing to face something inevitable, and finally signaled for Lucy with a slight wave of his hand. She approached quickly, trying to maintain her composure, though she knew all eyes were on them. Was everything okay with your meal, sir? She asked, with the same warm smile. He hesitated for a moment, lowering his eyes to his hands resting on the table. It was wonderful, he began, then started fumbling for some coins in his pocket. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Lucy noticed Robert watching from afar, a satisfied smile on his face, as if he was about to witness the outcome he'd predicted. The other employees exchanged glances, anticipating the embarrassment that would surely follow. But Lucy didn't hesitate. She knew this moment required more than just a simple act of service. In a soft but firm tone, she leaned in slightly and said, "Today we're celebrating the restaurant's first anniversary. And as a thank you to our customers, your meal is on the house." The old man looked at her, incredulous. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment he couldn't speak. After a long sigh, he simply said, "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." Lucy just smiled and shook her head. "No need to repay me, sir. I hope you have a wonderful day." The man got up slowly, adjusting his worn-out coat on his shoulders, and walked towards the door with slow but steady steps. He had no idea yet, but that meal would hold far more meaning than anyone there could imagine. As he left the restaurant, it felt like the lightness in the air left with him. The silence that remained was suffocating. Lucy watched the man walk out the door, his head held high with a dignity that, even after the hard conversation about money, still shone in his eyes. She knew she had done the right thing, but now the weight of Robert's gaze was on her like a blade about to fall. As soon as the sound of the door closing echoed through the restaurant, Robert came straight to Lucy, his face red with barely contained anger. He didn't yell, but his voice, low and sharp, cut like glass. "What exactly do you think you did? This restaurant isn't a charity, Lucy. Now who's going to pay for that bill?" Lucy met his gaze, standing firm. Her voice was calm, despite the fear she felt inside. "Robert, I'll take responsibility. He couldn't pay, and it was the right thing to do. It's not just about business, It's about humanity. Humanity? Robert repeated with scorn, almost laughing. He stepped closer until his face was inches from hers. Humanity doesn't pay our bills at the end of the month. And you, with this little stunt of yours, are hurting us. Do you think being all nice and soft is going to keep this place running? Lucy's eyes started to well up, but she blinked quickly, forcing herself to stay composed. She didn't want to cry. Not now, not in front of him. She could feel the pressure of all the other staff watching from a distance, waiting to see how this would end. She knew many of them shared Robert's opinion, and that only made her feel more alone. Robert shook his head, exasperated. I'm docking this from your paycheck. You know that, right? I hope it was worth it. Lucy held his gaze, even as her heart tightened. It was. He needed it. Without waiting for a response, Roberto turned on his heel and stormed off, his heavy footsteps echoing, leaving the air thick with judgment. Lucy stood there, motionless, feeling the tears threatening to fall. She wanted to run, to hide for a few minutes and breathe. But she couldn't. Not now. She went back to the counter, trying to get back to her routine, but it was impossible to ignore the stares. She could feel the judgment from everyone. Even those who said nothing were condemning her actions. Nobody there seemed to understand what she saw in that old man. To them, he was just another penniless man, insignificant, and helping someone like that was a waste of effort. To Lucy, he was a human being, just like any other customer she served every day. The minutes dragged by. The rest of the shift was filled with a tense silence, and she did her best to ignore the whispers that spread around her. The clock seemed to slow, but finally, it was time to go home. Lucy gathered her things from the locker room and stepped out through the back doors. The night had already fallen. The air was cool and damp, and she let out a long sigh. The relief of being outside the restaurant was palpable, but her chest still felt tight. Deep down, she knew she'd done the right thing, but why did it feel so heavy to bear? She walked through the streets at a slow pace, the city lights glowing above her. It was as if the weight of everyone's expectations was still on her shoulders. Did I go too far? She wondered, in a moment of doubt. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the image of Roberto's furious face or her colleagues' distrustful looks. Maybe she was naive. Maybe she was the only one left who still believed that small acts of kindness could make a difference. But when she thought about the old man's gaze, the silent gratitude, and the dignity he held on to, Lucy knew she wasn't wrong. It was easy to be kind to those who could pay. The true test of character was treating everyone with the same respect. The next day, she woke up still feeling the weight of the previous night. The walk to work was quiet, and she couldn't help but wonder what awaited her at the restaurant. Would Robert be even more upset? Would her colleagues completely ignore her? Or would she be forced to apologize for something that, deep down, she knew wasn't wrong? When she arrived at the restaurant, everything seemed the same until she noticed something strange. There was an expensive car parked out front, the kind of vehicle rarely seen in that part of town. As she stepped inside, she noticed a different buzz among the staff. Some were whispering, others were tense. She felt a slight pressure in her chest. What was going on? As soon as she walked through the door, Roberto's eyes locked onto her. He was talking to someone Lucy couldn't see at first. She walked to the counter, and that's when she saw him. The old man was back. But this time, he wasn't wearing the shabby clothes from the day before. He was dressed in an elegant suit, his shoes polished, and his posture was straight, confident. He looked like a completely different person. Lucy froze for a moment, unsure of what to think. It was him, but at the same time, it wasn't. Her heart raced. What was he doing here? And why did everyone seem so tense? Robert, still unaware of Lucy's presence, was speaking to the old man, but his tone was completely different from the day before. He was nervous, trying to sound calm, but failing miserably. Sir, I didn't know it was you. If I had known, I would have. The old man raised his hand, stopping him with a gentle but firm gesture. Don't worry, Roberto. I'm not here because of you. When he finally looked at Lucy, his expression softened. A kind smile formed on his lips, and he motioned for her to come closer. With her heart in her throat, she walked slowly toward the table where he sat, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on them. "Lucy," he began, his voice calm and serene, "you're probably wondering what's going on, aren't you?" She nodded, unable to speak. Everything felt surreal, like a confusing dream she couldn't wake up from. The old man looked around, making sure everyone was watching, and then, with a voice filled with emotion, he revealed, "I am the owner of this restaurant." The silence that fell over the restaurant was absolute. The sound of silverware, conversations, and even the footsteps of the waiters stopped instantly. Every eye was now fixed on the old man, who had just revealed himself as the owner of the restaurant. Lucy felt the world spin for a second. His words echoed in her mind. "I am the owner of this restaurant." She blinked, confused, as she tried to process what was happening. The man in front of her, the same one who wore rags the day before, now wore an impeccable suit and carried himself with the firm authority of someone in charge. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't changed. The kindness, the silent dignity that had touched Lucy's heart from the first moment. You're the owner?" Lucy finally managed to ask, her voice barely coming out. She didn't know what else to say, her chest tight with confusion and nervousness. The words didn't seem to make sense, and the look of surprise and shock from her colleagues only added to the tension. The man nodded, smiling softly. "Yes, my name is James Winston. I've owned this restaurant for years, and yesterday I wanted to see how my employees treated those who, at first glance, seemed to have little to offer. I chose to disguise myself as a humble person, someone who wouldn't be treated with the usual courtesy we give to wealthy customers." Robert, who had remained silent until then, interrupted, his tone nervous as he tried to regain some control over the situation. "Mr. Winston, I'm sorry about the misunderstanding yesterday. If we had known it was you..." James raised his hand again, politely but firmly asking for silence. "That's exactly the point, Roberto. You didn't know, and what I witnessed was eye-opening." He turned to face Robert, his eyes steady. "I saw how you handled someone you believed had no value here. It wasn't just you, Robert. I heard the whispers. I saw the looks of disdain. It wasn't just words, it was attitudes." Robert turned pale. The confidence he always carried had evaporated. He tried to say something, but the words died in his throat. James ignored him and turned back to Lucy, his gaze softening once more. "But you, Lucy," he said, his voice lower but filled with emotion, "were different. In a place where judgment was immediate, where compassion seemed to have no place, you were a light of kindness. You didn't hesitate. You treated me with respect, as if I were the most important customer who had ever walked in here. You gave me dignity." Lucy felt tears welling up in her eyes, and this time she didn't hold them back. They slid down her cheeks as she tried to absorb what was happening. She had never sought recognition. She just wanted to do what she believed was right. But now, in this moment, being praised for something as simple as showing empathy, it felt grand, bigger than she could have imagined. The entire restaurant remained silent. The other waiters and employees were stunned. Some looked unsettled. Others seemed to be reflecting on their own actions from the day before. Lucy, however, couldn't take her eyes off James. Her heart was racing, but not out of fear. It was a mix of relief and gratitude. I was just doing what anyone should do," Lucy murmured, trying to make sense of how everything had escalated. But James shook his head. "Unfortunately, no, Lucy. Not everyone would have acted like you did. And that's why I want to do something to show my appreciation." He straightened up, looking around to ensure everyone was paying attention. "As of today, you will be the new manager of this restaurant." The impact of those words was immediate. Roberto's face turned as white as a sheet. The other employees looked at each other in disbelief, some whispering among themselves. Lucy, though, was paralyzed. It was as if time had stopped. "Manager," she managed to stammer, unable to believe what she was hearing. James smiled and nodded. "Yes, you deserve it. Someone with your compassion, your ability to lead by example, should be in a position where they can influence others. I don't need people who just know how to follow orders and coldly enforce rules. I need leaders who understand the importance of treating everyone with humanity, no matter who they are or how they appear. Robert tried to intervene again, this time with a voice almost desperate. But Mr. Winston, I've managed this restaurant for years. I made a mistake yesterday, but James interrupted him calmly, but firmly. Robert, your time as manager is over. You've made it clear to me that you don't share the values I want for this place. I can't have someone who judges people by their appearance and puts profits above human dignity. He paused briefly, watching the impact of his words. You're dismissed from here. James's words were delivered quietly, but the impact was devastating. Robert staggered back, unable to hide the shock and humiliation. His once confident expression was now shattered. He tried to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, with no other options, he shot a hateful look at Lucy, who was still in shock from everything happening, and stormed out of the restaurant, slamming the door behind him. The restaurant remained in tense silence for a few moments. Lucy, still processing everything, stood frozen, almost unable to react. But when James looked at her again, with a calm and encouraging smile, something inside her finally gave way. The tears flowed once more, and this time, she didn't hold them back. The emotion was overwhelming. She felt overjoyed but also incredibly grateful. She had done something simple, something she believed was right, and it had led her to a place she never could have imagined. Thank you. I don't even know what to say, she murmured, wiping the tears with the back of her hands. James approached and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't need to say anything, Lucy. Just keep being who you are. You deserve this. The other employees, who had been silent until that moment, began to applaud timidly, and soon the entire restaurant was clapping. The customers, who had watched the scene in silence, also joined in the show of support. Lucy looked around, feeling the warmth and recognition from everyone, and for a brief moment, the weight of what she had done seemed lighter. James, with the same calm smile, stepped back, allowing Lucy to take in the moment. He knew it was a well-deserved reward, but he also knew that her true value lay in something far greater than a management position. Lucy's heart pounded as the sound of applause echoed through the restaurant. Her emotions were running wild, and what had once been a mix of shock and confusion was now turning into a deep sense of gratitude. But as the people around her continued clapping, she could hardly believe that all of this was really happening. How could someone as simple as her, a waitress who had always stayed in the background, now be responsible for something so big? It felt like a dream too distant to be real. James Winston remained standing in front of her, his gaze serene and confident, as if he had known all along that she was the right person for the job. He waited patiently until the applause died down, and then he motioned for everyone to return to their normal activities. The staff, still stunned, slowly resumed their tasks, though it was clear the impact of the revelation still lingered in the air. Lucy, however, remained motionless. Her mind was racing, trying to absorb everything. She wanted to speak, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. She felt a mix of euphoria and fear. Euphoria for the trust James had placed in her, and fear for the weight of the responsibility that had just fallen on her shoulders. James noticed her hesitation and, with an understanding smile, stepped closer once again. Lucy, don't feel pressured. I know this is a lot to take in all at once, but trust me, you are exactly the kind of person I want leading this place. Don't see this promotion just as recognition. See it as an opportunity to do even more of what you already do. Lucy looked at him, the tears still lightly streaming down her cheeks. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I can do it. James smiled, and his gaze softened even more. You've already proven that you're ready, Lucy. When you treated me with respect and dignity, without knowing who I was, you showed that you have the true essence of a leader. This role isn't just about numbers or rules. It's about people, and you, more than anyone else, understand that. Lucy looked around. She could feel her colleagues' eyes on her, some with genuine support, others with a bit of skepticism. She knew many of them underestimated her, didn't believe she could take on a leadership role. But there was something in the way James spoke, a quiet confidence that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, he was right. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I'll do my best." James nodded and took a step back. "I know you will." In the weeks that followed, Lucy's life changed in ways she never could have predicted. The transition from waitress to manager was sudden and challenging. Although the employees had been forced to accept her new position, not everyone was happy with the change. There were skeptical glances, whispers in the hallways, and at times, silent resistance from some members of the team. At first, Lucy tried to ignore it. She maintained her professional demeanor, treated everyone with the same respect she had always shown, but the pressure was immense. Before, her job had been about making sure the customers were well taken care of. Now, she was responsible for the entire operation of the restaurant. Decisions about supplies, staff schedules, and even the quality of the dishes now rested on her shoulders. And there was always James's gaze. Even when he wasn't physically present, it felt like he was always there, expecting the best from her with every move she made. One afternoon, after a particularly tough week, Lucy locked herself in the office. The restaurant was packed, and everything seemed to be going wrong. One of the waiters hadn't shown up, a customer was complaining nonstop about a wrong order, and the finances seemed to be off balance. She felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier, crushing her. Everything seemed to be falling apart around her, and the feeling of being watched and judged by her colleagues only added to the stress. She sank into the chair, her trembling hands resting on the desk. The small, stuffy office made her feel even more claustrophobic. What had she done? How had she thought she could handle all this? Being a waitress was hard, but being a manager felt like carrying the world on her shoulders. Suddenly, she felt the tears burning in her eyes again. Before she could completely succumb to the pressure, the office door opened. James was there, standing in the doorway. He looked at her for a long moment before stepping in and quietly closing the door behind him. Lucy, surprised, quickly wiped her tears, trying to pull herself together. "Sorry, she started, but James interrupted her, sitting down in front of her. "Lucy, you're doing really well." His voice was calm, almost fatherly, and he looked at her with a kindness that immediately soothed some of the panic she was feeling. She shook her head, unable to hold back the emotions overwhelming her. "I don't know, James. I feel like I'm failing. Everything seems to be falling apart. I don't know if I can handle this responsibility." James leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his gaze steady and full of understanding. "Do you think being a manager is easy? It's not. And it's normal to feel overwhelmed, especially at the beginning. What you're feeling right now is the weight of being responsible for other people, for something bigger than yourself. It will never be easy, but that's exactly why I chose you. Because you understand that leadership isn't about power or control. It's about care." Lucy looked at him, still with tears in her eyes, but now calmer. "But what if I fail? What if I can't do this?" James smiled slightly, as if he had heard that question many times before. "You'll fail, Lucy. We all fail at some point. But what matters is how you respond to it. What concerns me isn't whether you'll make mistakes, but whether you'll learn from them. And I know you will." His words echoed in her mind. Lucy took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew the challenge ahead was still immense, but for the first time since she had taken on the role, she felt capable of facing it. James stood up, gave her a light pat on the shoulder, and smiled before leaving the office. Lucy sat there for a few minutes, reflecting on what he had said. The pressure was still there, but now there was something different, a sense that, despite the obstacles, she could overcome it all. She wasn't alone on this journey. In the following months, Lucy continued to face daily challenges, but little by little, she began to find her rhythm. She learned how to deal with the resistant staff, earning the trust of some and setting boundaries with others. And over time, The respect that had once been reluctantly given began to feel genuine. She was no longer just the promoted waitress, but a manager who showed the same humanity and compassion that she had always demonstrated as an employee. The transformation was slow but real, and every time she felt insecure, she remembered James's words. Leadership isn't about power, it's about care. Lucy felt like the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. The announcement of her promotion to manager still echoed in her ears, but instead of immediate relief, the weight of responsibility seemed to crush her. James's kind smile, applauded by the customers and employees, had disappeared along with the euphoria of the moment. What was left was reality. She, a simple waitress, would now have to manage an entire restaurant. In the days following her promotion, Lucy quickly realized the transition would be anything but easy. The environment that had once felt familiar and comforting had become a minefield. Her former co-workers now looked at her with suspicion and, in some cases, even resentment. Before, they had been equals. Now, she was the boss, and not everyone was willing to accept that with open arms. At first, Lucy tried to maintain the routine without making major changes. She kept greeting the waiters with her usual smile and made an effort to be friendly and collaborative. But the atmosphere was different. The jokes and casual conversations that used to fill the work breaks had been replaced by awkward silences and cold stares. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn between her and the rest of the team. One afternoon, while she was trying to reorganize the staff schedule, she overheard two waiters whispering in the hallway. The words were muffled, but the tone of disdain was unmistakable. "She thinks she can boss us around now just because the old man gave her a promotion?" One of them said, laughing dismissively. "It's only a matter of time before she fails," the other responded. "She was always just a waitress, nothing more." The words cut through Lucy like knives. She pretended not to hear and continued with her task, but the impact was deep. The doubts she had been trying to suppress began to echo louder in her mind. What if they were right? What if she really wasn't ready for all of this? Every mistake she made, no matter how small, felt like confirmation of what her colleagues thought, that she wasn't capable. The pressure kept building as the days passed. Lucy now had to deal with supervising the inventory, resolving staff disputes, and, of course, ensuring that the customers were always satisfied. Before, as a waitress, she could focus on one customer at a time. Now, the success of the entire restaurant depended on her decisions. And with every step she took, she felt James Winston's watchful gaze, always expecting her to thrive. A week after her promotion, the tension reached its peak. The restaurant was packed, orders were piling up, and chaos seemed imminent. One of the waiters, Mike, with whom Lucy had worked side by side for months, seemed particularly irritated that night. While she was reviewing a wrong order, he approached, huffing with impatience. "This place is turning into a mess, Lucy," he said bitterly, crossing his arms. "You're holding us up. Things used to run smoothly, but now..." She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Mike, I know it's hard at first, but we're making adjustments. If we work together..." "Together?" He interrupted her, laughing sarcastically. "You're not on our side anymore, Lucy. Now you're just another boss telling us what to do, and it's not going to work." Lucy remained silent for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. There was a bitterness there that she hadn't expected, a built-up anger that was now exploding. Before she could respond, Mike walked away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the chaotic kitchen. His words kept echoing in her mind for the rest of the night. When the restaurant finally closed, Lucy locked herself in the office, trying to hold back the tears. Everything seemed to be falling apart. She felt like every step forward was followed by 2 steps back. The burden of being a leader was becoming unbearable. She sank into the chair, her eyes fixed on the spreadsheets she could barely read. The feeling of failure was overwhelming. How could James have believed that she, a simple waitress, was ready for this? Everything seemed to be going wrong. And then, no longer able to contain the pressure, the tears finally rolled down her face. "I can't do this," she whispered to herself, her voice weak. "I'm not strong enough for this." The sound of the door opening behind her made her jump. James Winston stood there at the entrance. He looked at her for a long moment before walking in and quietly closing the door behind him. Lucy, surprised, quickly wiped her tears, trying to pull herself together. "Sorry, I shouldn't be crying at work." James watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You're going through what every leader faces, Lucy. It's not easy. It never was, and it never will be." She shook her head, still trying to hold back the tears. "I feel like I'm failing, James. The staff doesn't respect me. The mistakes are piling up, and I don't know if I can do this." James leaned forward a little, his eyes fixed on hers. "Lucy, respect doesn't come immediately. It's earned, especially when you step into a leadership role. And making mistakes is part of the process. But the most important thing is what you do after those mistakes. That's how you get back up." Lucy felt a slight relief hearing James's words, but there was still a lingering doubt. What if I never earn that respect? What if I'm not the right person for this? James smiled gently. "You already are the right person, Lucy. And the respect, well, that will come with time. You showed more humanity and compassion in a single gesture than many managers show in their entire careers. That's what matters." But no one said it would be easy. She remained silent, absorbing his words. James stood up and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Give yourself time, and if you need help, I'm here." Lucy nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude. He didn't need to say anything more. Just knowing that she wasn't alone in this process was a relief. When he left the office, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment. The doubts were still there, but now there was something else. A spark of determination, small but growing. The following days were crucial. Lucy decided that instead of hiding from her challenges, she would face them head-on. She started calling the staff in for individual conversations, trying to understand their concerns and listen to their criticisms. Some still resisted, especially Mike, who maintained a distant and cold attitude. But little by little, others began to recognize her effort. She wasn't trying to impose authority. She was trying to lead by example. One night, after a particularly tough shift, one of the older waiters, John, approached her at the end of the day. He looked around, making sure no one was listening, and then spoke in a low voice. "Lucy, I just wanted to say, I respect what you're trying to do. I know it hasn't been easy, but you're doing well." She smiled, surprised and grateful. "Thank you, John. That means a lot." He shrugged, as if it weren't a big deal, but the gesture warmed Lucy's heart. Slowly but surely, the respect she had been seeking was starting to come through. The challenges didn't disappear, but Lucy learned to handle them. Each day was a new battle, but now she had the tools to face them. Leadership wasn't about perfection, it was about resilience. And with every obstacle, she grew stronger, more confident. The restaurant, which had once felt like a battlefield, was now starting to shape itself to her vision. A place where humanity and respect came first. James watched from a distance, proud. He knew he had chosen the right person. The months that followed Lucy's difficult transition to manager were marked by ups and downs, but little by little, she began to earn the trust of everyone around her. What had once been a heavy, distrustful, and resistant environment transformed into a space of cooperation and camaraderie. Lucy knew the secret wasn't in asserting authority, but in leading with heart and valuing teamwork. And that's exactly what she did. Her leadership style became recognized by all the staff. She was someone who listened, who supported, and most importantly, who never forgot the struggles she had faced as a waitress. Instead of focusing on mistakes, Lucy encouraged learning. She helped those who were overwhelmed, always willing to do the hard work alongside them rather than giving orders from afar. Gradually, the atmosphere in the restaurant changed. The staff began to trust each other, the tensions faded, and the work became almost an extension of a family bond. Laughter now filled the hallways. Jokes between colleagues became common again, and customer service became warmer than ever. Customers noticed the difference, not just in the service but in the very environment. The packed tables and constant flow of people were proof that the restaurant was thriving. And the financial success didn't take long to appear. The restaurant began making more profit than ever before. The place's reputation spread throughout the city, attracting new customers looking for not just good food, but a welcoming and respectful experience. Lucy had created a place where people didn't just come to eat. They came to feel good, to be seen, and to be treated with dignity. James Winston, though he kept a certain distance from the day-to-day running of the restaurant, followed everything closely. He saw the reports, the growing profits, but what pleased him most was seeing how the environment had changed. When he made his occasional visits to the restaurant, he saw a place full of positive energy, and he knew that Lucy had fulfilled everything he had hoped for. His choice had been the right one. Lucy, for her part, finally felt at peace with her role. The doubts and insecurities that had haunted her in the beginning had dissipated. She knew she wasn't perfect, but she had learned that a leader's true strength came from the ability to care for those around them. And now, she was reaping the rewards of that care. One day, on a quiet afternoon, while the restaurant was in full swing, a man walked through the door, drawing curious looks. He seemed different, disheveled and tired, with worn-out clothes and eyes filled with sadness. When Lucy looked up and saw who it was, her heart skipped a beat. It was Robert, the former manager, who had once walked confidently through the restaurant's hallways, now looked like a shadow of the man he used to be. He stopped at the entrance, hesitant, clearly uncomfortable, as if he wasn't sure if he should be there. His eyes scanned the place, observing the welcoming and prosperous atmosphere that Lucy had helped create. The staff recognized him, but no one said anything. Silence filled the room for a few seconds. Lucy, sensing the tension, walked over to him. Her heart was racing, but not with anger or resentment. She knew something was wrong. "Robert," she said softly as she approached. "Is everything okay?" He looked up, and Lucy saw the weight in his eyes. Robert looked different, not just physically, but emotionally broken. The arrogant and controlling man who had once been her superior now seemed vulnerable and lost. "Lucy," his voice was low, almost a whisper. He took a deep breath, as if trying to gather the courage. I came to apologize." Surprise crossed Lucy's face. She hadn't expected that. Robert, the one who had humiliated her, who had doubted her abilities and treated her with such disdain, was now standing in front of her asking for forgiveness. "I was wrong about you," he continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I didn't believe in you. I underestimated your compassion and judged you for wanting to help someone I thought didn't deserve it. But now, I see that I was wrong." Lucy remained silent, letting him continue. It was clear that this wasn't easy for him, but Robert seemed determined to speak. "I, out of pride, didn't accept Mr. James's offer and went to work at another restaurant. I quickly lost that job," he admitted, shame spreading across his face. "I thought I could find another easily, but it didn't happen. And since then I've been struggling. I've been to many places looking for work, but no one would give me a chance." He sighed, looking down at his feet. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything after the way I treated you, but I had to come here and apologize. And maybe if there's any job I can do, anything, I really need it." The silence between the two seemed to last an eternity. Lucy felt a series of emotions crossing her chest. She could see the man in front of her for who he was now, not the arrogant manager she had known, but a man humbled by his circumstances, remorseful for his past actions. And in that moment, she realized she had the power to do something greater than any promotion or leadership: the power of forgiveness. With a gentle smile, Lucy did something Robert didn't expect. "Come with me," she said, motioning for him to follow her to an empty table. He, still surprised, obeyed without saying a word. Lucy soon returned, carrying a hot plate of food. "Here," she said, placing the dish in front of him. "Eat first." Robert remained frozen, looking at the plate with a mix of surprise and gratitude. I didn't expect this." Lucy smiled again. "I believe no one should be judged by their worst moments, Robert. and everyone deserves a second chance. She sat across from him, watching him with a kind look. And about the job? I'll help you. Robert looked up, incredulous. You would do that for me? After everything? Lucy nodded. We all make mistakes, Robert. I did what I thought was right, and I believe you can do that too. The restaurant is growing, and we always need people willing to learn and work as a team. If you're ready to start fresh, the door is open. Tears formed in Robert's eyes. He nodded, unable to express the gratitude he felt. In that moment, Lucy wasn't just helping him with a plate of food and an opportunity. She was offering him something much greater: dignity and hope. The days that followed marked the beginning of a new chapter. Robert, now part of the team again, had changed. He worked humbly, respectfully, and thanked Lucy every day for the opportunity. The staff, who initially viewed him with suspicion, soon noticed his transformation and welcomed him. The restaurant, now more successful than ever, continued to thrive under Lucy's leadership, and everyone there knew that success wasn't just measured in profits, but in humanity. Lucy had proven to herself and everyone around her that a leader's true power lay in their heart, a heart big enough to embrace everyone, even those who once underestimated her. And so, with the help of everyone, the restaurant kept growing, not just as a place of great food, but as a place where compassion reigned, and where each person, regardless of their circumstances, found a second chance. If this story touched you, remember, every act of kindness has the power to change lives. Just like Lucy, we can be the change in our environments, leading with compassion and respect. Have you done your part today? How about supporting me by liking and subscribing to the channel? Thank you, and see you in the next video.